Mike had been working as a night shift security guard at Walmart for a few years. It wasn't the most exciting job, but it paid the bills. Winter was always the toughest season. The parking lot was a sheet of ice. The wind cut through his coat during rounds, and the store felt eerily quiet after midnight. That night, the snowstorm was relentless. The few shoppers who had ventured out earlier were long gone, leaving the store almost empty except for a skeleton crew of employees restocking shelves. Mike did his usual walk around the store, checking the aisles, making sure everything was in order. Around 2 a.m., he noticed something odd. Near the back of the store, close to the automotive section, a shopping cart was sitting in the middle of the aisle. That wasn't unusual, but the cart was filled with random items: cans of soup, duct tape, a flashlight, and a single baby shoe. It looked like someone had started shopping and abandoned it. Mike shrugged and pushed it to the side, assuming an employee would take care of it. But as he walked away, he thought he heard the faint sound of footsteps. He stopped and turned around, scanning the aisle. Nothing, just the quiet hum of the overhead lights. He continued his patrol, but the feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. Every now and then, he caught a glimpse of movement in his peripheral vision, a shadow darting behind a shelf, a flicker of light that didn't belong at 3 a.m. He decided to check the security cameras. Sitting in the small office at the back of the store, he rewound the footage from the automotive section. What he saw made his stomach tighten. The shopping cart had appeared out of nowhere. One moment, the aisle was empty, and in the next frame, the cart was just there. No one had pushed it into view, and no one had walked through the aisle. He leaned closer to the screen, rewinding and playing the footage again and again. His radio crackled, snapping him out of his trance. It was one of the Night Stalkers. "Hey, Mike, can you come to the storage area? Something weird's going on back here." Mike grabbed his flashlight and headed to the storage area. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering slightly as he stepped into the room. The stalker, a young guy named Luis, was standing near the back wall, looking pale. "What's going on?" Mike asked. Luis pointed to the corner of the room. "That door. I swear it was locked earlier." Mike shined his flashlight on the door Luis was pointing at. It was a heavy metal door that led to a disused part of the store section that had been closed off years ago during renovations. He tested the handle. It was slightly ajar. "Stay here," Mike said, pushing the door open. The air on the other side was colder, almost unnaturally so. His breath fogged up as he stepped inside. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing dusty shelves and forgotten pallets. As he moved deeper, he noticed faint footprints in the dust, leading further into the room. The footprints stopped abruptly in the center of the space.
No exit. No explanation.
Just an empty spot on the floor. Then, he heard a faint, almost imperceptible sound, like someone breathing right behind him. Mike spun around, flashlight shaking slightly in his hand. Nothing. He backed out of the room, heart pounding, and locked the door behind him. The rest of the shift passed in uneasy silence. He didn't tell Luis what he saw, and he didn't check the cameras again. The next morning, as he was clocking out, the store manager stopped him. "Hey, Mike. Did you notice anything unusual last night?" Mike hesitated. "Why?" The manager frowned. "There's been a report of strange activity in the store lately. Employees hearing noises, things being moved around. One of the day shift cashiers even said she saw someone standing in the parking lot at the edge of the lot lines a few nights ago. But when she looked again, they were gone." Mike didn't respond. He just nodded, grabbed his coat, and left. But as he walked across the icy parking lot to his car, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was still watching him. Mike's car was parked at the far end of the lot, its windows frosted over from the storm. As he approached, his boots crunching in the fresh snow, he noticed something strange. On the driver's side window, there was a handprint clear and distinct, as if someone had pressed their palm against the glass. He stopped in his tracks, scanning the lot. The only other vehicles belonged to the few night shift employees, and they were parked closer to the store. The snow around his car was untouched. No footprints. Mike pulled his keys from his pocket, glancing over his shoulder as he unlocked the car. The interior was just as he'd left it. He brushed off the handprint with his glove, telling himself it was probably just a prank by one of the employees. But as he drove home, his thoughts kept circling back to the night's events. The shopping cart, the door, the footprints that stopped in the middle of the room. When he got home, the sun was just starting to rise, casting an orange glow over the snow-covered streets. Mike locked the door behind him, double-checking it out of habit, and collapsed onto the couch. He didn't want to think about Walmart, the cameras, or that strange, cold room. But sleep didn't come easily. The next night, Mike almost called in sick. He told himself it was just exhaustion and the stress of working nights during winter. But something tugged at him, a nagging feeling that he needed to figure out what was going on. The first few hours of his shift were quiet, almost too quiet. The employees seemed jittery, whispering among themselves. Luis avoided making eye contact with him entirely. Around midnight, the fire alarm went off. It wasn't a loud blare, just a single, shrill beep that came from the maintenance panel near the back of the store. Mike grabbed his radio and made his way over, expecting to find a simple glitch. When he reached the panel, the display read, "Smoke detected storage area." His stomach dropped. That was the same section as the locked door. Mike radioed the manager on duty, letting her know he was investigating, and made his way to the storage area. This time, the lights weren't flickering, they were out completely. He used his flashlight to guide the way, his breath fogging in the cold air. When he reached the door, it was wide open that he froze. He knew he had locked it the night before. The air beyond the door was freezing again, colder than the rest of the store. His flashlight beam swept over the dusty shelves, but this time, there were more footprints. They didn't just lead into the room, they circled the center and then disappeared into a far corner. "Hello?" Mike called, his voice echoing slightly. No response. Just the faint sound of something dripping. He followed the sound, his footsteps crunching softly in the frozen dust. In the corner of the room, he found an old, rusted drain. Water or something darker was seeping up from it, pooling on the floor, and then he heard it again. breathing. Not behind him this time, but beneath him. Mike staggered back, his flashlight shaking as he pointed it at the drain. The sound grew louder, more labored, almost like someone struggling to breathe through water. Then, the grate shifted slightly, as if something was pushing up against it from below. Mike didn't wait to see what happened next. He ran out of the room, slamming the door shut and locking it. His radio crackled to life just as he reached the main floor. "Mike, are you okay?" The fire alarm panel just reset. He didn't respond, too shaken to speak as the night dragged on. He couldn't shake the feeling that the store wasn't empty. The cameras didn't show anything unusual, but every time he turned a corner, he felt like he was just a step behind someone or something. When his shift ended, he made a decision. He wasn't coming back. At home, Mike hadn't stepped foot in Walmart since that last shift. But even at home, the unease followed him. The first sign was subtle wet footprints on his living room carpet one morning, despite him always taking off his boots at the door. He cleaned them up, telling himself it must have been a mistake. But over the next few days, strange things started happening. The lights in his apartment would flicker, and he'd hear faint sounds at night, soft creaks, like someone walking down his hallway. Once, while taking a shower, he thought he saw the shadow of a hand on the other side of the shower curtain. When he pulled it back, there was nothing there. Then, one night, his phone buzzed with a message from Luis. "Mike, you need to come back. There's something wrong with the storage area."
I'm scared, man.
Mike hesitated. He had no intention of returning to that place, but Luis's message left him unsettled. He texted back, "What's going on?" Luis responded almost immediately, "The door to the storage room keeps opening on its own. And yesterday, I swear I saw someone standing in there. But when I checked, it was empty." Mike stared at the message, his heart racing. After a long moment, he typed back, "Call the manager. It's not your problem." Luis's reply came quickly, "I did. They checked the cameras. The footage is messed up, glitchy, like static. But you can see something moving." Mike felt a chill run down his spine. The decision the next day, Mike couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to know what was going on. He called Luis and agreed to meet him outside Walmart after his shift. When he arrived that evening, the snow was falling again, blanketing the parking lot in a thick, quiet layer. Luis was already waiting near the employee entrance, pacing nervously. "Thanks for coming," Luis said, his breath fogging in the icy air. "I couldn't stay in there alone anymore." Mike nodded. "Show me the cameras." Inside the security office, Luis replayed the footage from the storage area. The screen flickered, lines of static cutting through the video. But in one frame, Mike saw it, a dark, blurry shape, standing near the drain in the floor. It didn't move like a person. Its form seemed to shift and flicker with the static. "What the hell is that?" Mike muttered. Luis shook his head. "I don't know, man, but it's been happening every night since you left." Back to the storage area, Mike wasn't sure why he agreed to check the storage area again. Maybe it was guilt, or maybe he just needed to see it for himself. He and Luis walked through the quiet aisles, their footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust on the floor. The door to the storage room was open again. The air beyond it was freezing, just like before. Mike stepped inside first, his flashlight sweeping the room. The footprints were back, circling the center of the room and leading to the drain. Luis stayed close behind him, clutching a crowbar he had grabbed from the tool section as they approached the drain. The faint sound of breathing began again. Mike stopped in his tracks, motioning for Luis to stay quiet. The sound grew louder, more guttural, as if something was struggling to breathe beneath them. Suddenly, the grate over the drain shifted, as though something was pushing against it from below. Luis swore under his breath, taking a step back. "What do we do?" he whispered. Before Mike could answer, the breathing stopped, and then, without warning, the lights in the storage room went out, plunging them into darkness. "Mike!" Luis yelled. Mike's flashlight flickered as he frantically tried to point it toward the drain. But when the beam finally steadied, the grate was no longer there. Instead, an empty, gaping hole stared back at them. And from its depths came a single chilling sound. A laugh, low, raspy, and impossibly close. It was the winter of 2016, one of the coldest San Francisco had seen in years. I had just started a new job as a security guard at a Walmart. I was in my late 20s, just looking to get by until something better came along. The store was on the outskirts, quiet at night, especially during the holidays when most people stayed indoors. One night, the temperature dropped below freezing, and the store was emptier than usual. I was doing my usual rounds, walking through the aisles, checking for any signs of trouble. It was past midnight when I noticed a man lurking by the back corner, near the electrical section. He wasn't doing anything suspicious, just standing there, but something about him felt off. I walked closer, and as soon as he saw me, he quickly turned and disappeared behind the rows of shelves. I didn't think much of it at first. It was late, and I figured maybe he was just trying to get a bit of peace and quiet. But as the hours went on, I kept hearing noises from that same section, almost like someone was rummaging through boxes. Every time I'd check, I'd find nothing, just the quiet hum of the cooling units in the back. It started to mess with my head, and by 2 a.m., I was the only one left in the store. I decided to check the cameras. Everything seemed fine. No one was there except for a few customers who had checked out earlier. But then I noticed something. A faint movement in the corner of one camera, near the back aisle where I'd seen the man earlier. I couldn't make it out clearly, but it looked like someone was standing there again. I grabbed my flashlight and went to investigate. I moved slowly, trying not to make a sound. As I approached the aisle, the temperature seemed to drop even further, almost like a cold draft was coming from the shelves. When I turned the corner, I froze. The man I had seen earlier was standing there again, but this time he wasn't looking at the shelves. He was staring straight at me. I don't know how to explain it, but it felt like I was being watched, not just by him, but by something else in the store. I asked him if he needed help, but he didn't respond. I felt my heart pounding, my breath getting heavier, but I tried to keep calm. "Sir, you need to leave the store. We're closed." Still no answer. I was starting to panic. I had my radio, but the signal wouldn't work. I reached for my phone, but it wouldn't turn on. It was like the whole store had gone silent, and the only sound was the pounding of my own heartbeat. I took a step back, but then something I couldn't explain happened. The lights above flickered, and when they came back on, the man was gone. Vanished, no trace of him anywhere. I stood there for what felt like forever, unsure of what I had just witnessed. I checked the back again, still nothing. I didn't even leave the store for the rest of my shift. I thought it was just my nerves. But the next night, the same thing happened. That cold feeling, the silence, and the man standing in the same spot. Every time he'd disappear before I could get close. It's been years, and I still don't know what happened in that Walmart. But I'll never forget the feeling of someone or something watching me from the shadows, and how, no matter how hard I tried to shake it, I knew that I wasn't alone in that store. The following night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I tried to stay focused on my duties, but my mind kept wandering back to the strange man. Was he real? Had I imagined the whole thing? But deep down, I knew that something had happened, something I couldn't explain. I arrived early, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever it was that had been haunting me. It was still dark outside, and the store was quiet as usual. The same cold draft seemed to hang in the air, especially near the back aisle, like it was waiting for me. I walked through the aisles, trying to stay busy, but my attention kept drifting to the spot where I had seen the man. Around 1:30 a.m., I took a walk through the aisles again. I was getting paranoid, jumping at every little noise. The aisles were empty, just the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above and the occasional clink of a shopping cart left behind. But then I heard it. A soft scraping sound, like something moving across the floor, came from the back. I froze, listening intently. It sounded like someone dragging their feet. It didn't make sense. There shouldn't be anyone back there. The doors were locked, and there were no vehicles in the parking lot. My stomach twisted in knots. I grabbed my flashlight and made my way down the aisle, trying to stay calm, but the closer I got to the back, the colder it became. The scraping noise continued, growing louder. I turned the corner to the aisle where I had last seen the man. And there he was again, standing still in the same spot. This time he was even closer to me, just a few feet away. His back was turned, but I could feel his presence, like he was aware of me but refusing to acknowledge my existence. Cleared my throat. "Sir," I said, my voice sounding weak and unsteady. "You need to leave now." He didn't move, not an inch. I felt my heart race in my chest. Something in me told me that if I didn't leave that aisle right then, I might not be able to leave at all. But I couldn't tear myself away. I was paralyzed by fear, rooted to the spot. That's when I noticed it, a coldness creeping up from the floor, like something was emerging from beneath the tiles. My breath started to fog in front of me, and the air turned heavy, thick with a suffocating chill. I looked down at the man's feet, but there was no sign of him moving. He was just standing there, still as a statue. And then I saw it, a faint shadow, creeping along the floor, stretching out from underneath him, as if it were coming from the very ground. I took a step back, my body reacting before my mind could catch up. That's when the man finally moved. He turned around slowly, his head jerking unnaturally as though he hadn't done it willingly. His face was pale, and his eyes were too wide, almost unnatural. His mouth hung open slightly, but there was no sound. Just the scraping noise growing louder, echoing in the empty aisles. Couldn't breathe. I turned to run, but as I did, I heard something behind me. It was the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, following me down the aisle. I sprinted for the front doors, but the air felt heavier with every step. My vision blurred as I reached the exit, and when I pushed on the door, it wouldn't budge. I tugged at the door harder, panic setting in. The footsteps were right behind me now. I could hear them getting closer, getting faster. Finally, the door swung open with a loud creak, and I bolted outside, gasping for air. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, not daring to look back. I took the rest of the night off, sitting in my car, trying to calm down. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face. And I heard those footsteps getting closer. The next few nights were uneventful. I still showed up for my shifts, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I avoided the back aisle altogether, even though I knew it didn't make sense. No one else seemed to notice anything strange. I kept telling myself it was all in my head, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. A week later, I heard about something that made my blood run cold. A former employee, a night shift worker from a few months before, had vanished without a trace. No one had seen him leave, and the security cameras had no record of him walking out. They found his car still in the parking lot, but there was no sign of him anywhere. The police had no leads. I never told anyone about what happened that night. I didn't want to be labeled crazy. But now, every time I pass that Walmart, I can't help but wonder if that man is still there. Or if something darker is waiting for someone else to walk into that cold, empty store again. I never went back to that Walmart. After that night, I quit my job without a second thought, leaving behind my uniform and my access card. I didn't even bother going through the formalities. The thought of returning there, facing whatever it was that I had encountered, was too much. I started working a new job in a different part of the city, trying to forget about the eerie experience. Months passed, and life started to feel normal again. But there wasn't a day that went by without that feeling of unease, that sense that something wasn't quite right. I couldn't shake the image of that man, his wide eyes, his unnatural stillness. Sometimes, when I was alone at night, I would hear scraping noises, faint whispers, and feel a chill in the air, but I would always convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks. Then, one evening, something happened that I can't explain. I was scrolling through social media when I saw an old post about the Walmart where I had worked. It was a simple article about a new security system being installed. The headline was harmless enough: Walmart upgrades security to improve customer experience. But as I read the article, something caught my attention. A picture of the back aisle where I had first seen the man. The photo was from a few weeks after I had quit, and there, in the far corner of the aisle, was a shadowy figure. It wasn't just any shadow, it looked like a person, standing perfectly still, just as I had seen him before. I immediately felt sick to my stomach, my pulse quickening. I scrolled down, reading the comments, and one in particular stood out. Has anyone noticed the strange figure in the photo? It's been there for years. People say it's the ghost of a former employee who disappeared. No one talks about it, but I swear I've seen him there at night. I froze. A chill ran down my spine as the reality of it all hit me. The man wasn't just a random stranger. He was something else, something tied to that place, to the people who had worked there before. I could only assume that the strange noises, the feeling of being watched, and the inexplicable cold were all part of something darker, something I had unknowingly walked into. It's been a while since that moment. I haven't been back to that part of town, and I never want to. The thought of that Walmart still being there, haunted by whatever it is that lurks in the dark corners, is enough to keep me away forever. I sometimes wonder if I was just one of many people who had felt its presence, or if I was the only one who had seen what I saw. Either way, I'll never forget that place. And I'll never forget the scraping sound that followed me long after I thought I had escaped.